If you've come to hear the story of a quack doctor with a rather strange medical practice who ends up changing music and culture in America forever, then you've come to the right place. Enter John Brinkley, a hillbilly entrepreneur from Kansas who had aspirations that fell somewhere between high hopes and delusions of grandeur. In his own words, Brinkley wanted to illuminate the world, face assassins' bullets, free the slaves, and heal the sick. Part showman, part salesman, part doctor of quackery, his story begins when he and his wife started a radio station to promote and sell his snake oil remedies. He achieved moderate success with this, but knew that he needed to take things to the next level. He needed something that would set him above the competition, something that only he could offer. And soon he had what was to become his trademark. Only it was one that made him famous for all the wrong reasons. Inspired by one of his patients, a farmer who wished he had the equipment and stamina of a billy goat, Brinkley developed a procedure to transplant the male organs of a goat into his male patients who felt they needed to be more potent. Did this actually work? We'll never know, but to much of backwoods America, it made a lot of horse sense. And with that, Brinkley was off to the races. Brinkley soon became very wealthy, performing his goat gland procedure on those desperate enough to give it a go. Not sure what became of the thousands of goats he castrated in the process, though. Being the marketing genius that he was, he funded a local baseball team dubbed the Brinkley Goats to show off the supposed newfound virility of his patients. And what better way to promote your medical practice than to start a zoo? But that didn't really pan out for Brinkley, as the bear he bought kept him up at night, so he shot it. But radio continued to be his biggest draw. He was making a fortune from his sales of highly questionable remedies. On average, 3,000 letters a day from his faithful listeners poured into his radio station, an amount that staggered anything his local post office could handle, so he built a new one just for himself. But his fame brought with it the attention of a little agency called the American Medical Association, and Brinkley was soon in their sights. It wasn't long before he had both his radio and medical licenses revoked for operating as a charlatan and a quack. But as we all know, you can't keep a good swindler down. Radio had given Brinkley a means to reach the people of this nation with his own brand of medicine, and he was determined to continue to do so. Luckily for him, airway frequencies in Mexico were largely unregulated and pretty much up for grabs for anyone with a radio transmitter. So Brinkley headed south of the border, and by 1931 had established his own radio station just south of Texas. XER 735 AM was born. At 50,000 watts, the station could be heard in every state in the U.S., along with 15 other countries. Now Brinkley was reaching a much wider audience, and he was back in business. But again, this didn't sit well with some. This time it wasn't the AMA, but the Federal Communications Commission. Tons of complaints started pouring into the FCC from radio stations all over the country. It seems Brinkley's signal was so strong that it was drowning out other stations' broadcasts to the point where it had all but shut them down indefinitely. But since he wasn't stationed on American soil, not much could be done about it. And Brinkley not only continued broadcasting, but in true rebel fashion, upped power at his facility from 50,000 to an unprecedented 500,000 watts, far outrivaling any other radio station in existence, and becoming the most powerful station in the world. While Mexico had still remained a bastion of freedom for radio, the Mexican government wasn't too happy with an American coming in and making such a ruckus. Brinkley was broadcasting in English, so to most of the country, it was just unwelcomed noise coming over the radio. It wasn't very long before Mexican troops raided the station, and Brinkley's voice was silenced once again. But just as before, this only strengthened Brinkley's resolve. A year and a few legal loopholes later, he was back in business, with his station's output now up to a staggering 1 million watts. The signal was so strong that people began picking up the station through the metal fillings in their teeth. And those sleeping on metal bed frames were kept up at night as the transmissions were being picked up by them as well. Say what you want about Brinkley, but as a marketer, he was most definitely a genius. He had literally taken over the airwaves. Now, as a well-established media giant, Brinkley started selling airtime on his station to anyone that was willing to pay him. Everyone from fortune tellers to aspiring musicians now had a venue to be heard by millions, and appearing on his station almost guaranteed success. Brinkley seemed nearly unstoppable, but the AMA and the U.S. government still had a fighter in the ring. In order to avoid any heat from the Mexican government, Brinkley had to do a bit of a juggling act. He had relocated his studio to Del Rio, Texas, where he recorded his broadcasts. From there, the recordings were wired over the border to then be transmitted from his station in Mexico. The U.S. had caught on to this, and in an effort to shut him down, passed legislation which prohibited this practice. But the Brinkley Act, as it was called, did nothing more than essentially expand his branding. Brinkley did comply and ceased wiring his programs across the border. But in his defense, the act neglected to mention anything about the smuggling of them into Mexico, so that's what he did. Chalk up another W for Brinkley. As this all played out, and through his ingenious ways of avoiding federal regulation, Brinkley had unknowingly spawned a new breed of radio station called border blasters. These high-powered megawatt stations operated safely in Mexico to reach a massive American audience. They were a thorn in the side of the FCC, and John Brinkley was their public enemy number one. By now, Brinkley's station had become a staple for grassroots America. Whether tuning in for unconventional medicine advice or to catch the music of a new unknown artist, millions were hooked on Brinkley's brand of pirate radio. Most noteworthy amongst these musicians was the Carter family, a trio from the hills of Virginia. Through the help of Brinkley's station, they were able to share their love of folk music, born out of the heartland of Appalachia, with the rest of the country. And rural America loved it. Outside of Appalachia, these songs, some of which had been around for generations, had mostly gone unheard by the mainstream. But now they quickly spread and introduced what would come to be known as country music. To this day, it's still debated whether that was a blessing or a curse. Brinkley's station was not only credited in helping launch country music, but also artists in the genre as well. Johnny Cash was first introduced to Carter family's style of music while listening to the broadcasts as a young child, and Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top was also influenced by the music he heard on border blaster radio stations. Anyone old enough to remember the pioneering DJ and cultural icon Wolfman Jack? Well, he got his start as a DJ on a border blaster as well. But as time went on, Brinkley's renegade ways caught up with him. He eventually found himself the target of a flood of malpractice lawsuits, which ultimately left him bankrupt, ending his career as both a fringe doctor and radio pioneer. He would die a year later. John Brinkley had set off to make a name for himself, and he had done just that. To many, he was a true healer, and their go-to medico. To others, he was a swindler, a quack doctor who was only out to make a quick buck. But though not quite the outcome he intended, Brinkley forever changed our culture by giving voice to America's music, and in that, he was a success. And there are still a handful of border blaster stations alive today, carrying the flag for John Brinkley.
If I would make flamboyant claims or make claims over the radio that sounded great and big, I might mislead you. I would not mislead you in anything for anything in the world, because I am Dr. Brinkley speaking to you, and I am the friend of humanity, and especially your friend. Goodbye.